And I want to introduce you, first off, the steering committee of the Columbia-Montour Source Water Coalition, who is sponsoring today's event. First off, from the Conservation District is myself, Mary Ruth Wagner, our district manager, right here, Nancy Corbin, who's the other watershed specialist at the Conservation District. We also have Dr. Jennifer Wisner, who's right here, and Mark Stevens from Department of Environmental Protection of Pennsylvania. And then there's also Kim Leshak, who's Montour County Conservation District Manager. Before we start off, I want to encourage you to sign in and give your email if you would like to receive email from the Source Water Coalition. We'd be happy to put you on our mailing list. Our brochure is here, and a little information about the coalition is in a little booth setup. We are videotaping today's session because we know there's going to be a lot of important information, and the hour is not the most convenient for people. We will send a link to those who have given their email address, and we will also have it on our website, which is Columbia-Montour.swp.org. So that's just some information. Now Jen will say a couple words about our coalition.
And just in case you didn't write all that down really quickly, the website is on the flyer. So, or if you do a Google search on Columbia-Montour Source Water, that should get you where you need to go. Thank you all very much for coming. You may not have known it at the time, but you have shown up to a meeting of the Columbia-Montour Coalition for Source Water Protection. This is a coalition of water suppliers, watershed groups, business owners, individual citizens, civic organizations, conservation organizations whose goal is to protect over the long term our water resources, groundwater and surface water resources. One of the main parts of that goal is to encourage water suppliers to take advantage of the DEP's funding that's available to develop source water protection plans, and then use that information for land use planning, farming, industrial sites, and just everyday citizens' choices about how they use water, how they fertilize their lawns, whether they pick up after their dogs. All these things that can go into protecting our water and mitigating against any possible sources of contamination. Some things that we do here, or that we've already done, we're pretty young, just about a year old. We have submitted changes based on input from the coalition members on we have submitted input on the changes to Act 78, the part of the Pennsylvania Code that covers oil and gas drilling, advocating for them to take advantage of some of the information, some of the science we already have about potential impacts to water supplies, and to actually incorporate that into oil and gas drilling. Also about how to notify water suppliers about putting brine, the flowback water that comes from the oil and gas wells, on roads. We have sponsored a workshop with a longtime planner who talked to a lot of municipal officials about how to incorporate land use planning as a tool for source water protection. And at that meeting, the pipeline notices had just gone out, and some people said, what's going on with that? And we thought that there definitely could be some water protection, source water protection issues associated with putting in pipelines. So we asked and have our panel of experts up here and on both sides of me, sorry. Our panel of experts who will be talking about pipelines and pipeline safety. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce, I'm not going to, sorry, no interviews. I'm going to introduce Julie Kohler, who is Director of the Water Resource Education Network, and she will be our first speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you all? It's a pleasure to be with you. This is my second time here in this wonderful room, and the first time I was here was last July at the inauguration of the Columbia-Montour Source Water County Source Water Protection Coalition, and I want to congratulate all of you who have committed some very hard work over this past year to educate yourselves about where your drinking water is coming from, understand where those key areas are that are very environmentally sensitive, because public water supply is designed to last forever. for not only today, but for our kids and our grandchildren. Water supplies are to be perpetual. They're the foundation that communities and cities rely on in Pennsylvania and across the world. So it's essential that we know where those areas are. So this group has received funding from the League of Women Voters. I'm the director of the Water Resources Education Network. I'll explain, pardon me, who we are in just a moment. But this group has been working over the last year to energize and educate people about where your drinking water sources are located within the county, the two counties, and to encourage the public water systems to implement protection plans with the assistance from the Department of Environmental Protection about where those key areas are within your two counties. And to encourage, this is a voluntary program that is provided under the Safe Drinking Water Act, under the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. So this is not a regulatory program, this is a voluntary program. But it provides a very valuable package of services for any community or water supply that wants to take advantage of it. So Columbia-Montour, being very innovative and forward-thinking, said that's a very good idea. And they applied to REN last March, and we selected their proposal along with several others across the state. And so that's why we're here, because there are many issues dealing with water supply that will come up from time to time. Years and years ago, it may have been timbering. Years ago, it may have been coal mining. Years ago, it could be industrial risks. It could be agriculture. Today, it happens to be pipelines, possibly, and that's why many of you are here. So what we would like to do is put this in the context that we work within, which is protection of water supply. And we're going to take you through some things today. And I understand that we have a very short time window to be with you because we have another follow-on meeting at 2 p.m. So we are going to probably, what may feel like we're hitting you with a fire hose of information. And I apologize for that, but I'm so gratified to see how many citizens are here to understand and learn more about this important topic, this change that's coming throughout Pennsylvania. It's part of, we're part of a global energy picture and development effort now in terms of shale gas within Pennsylvania. So we're going to give you one little aspect of this topic today and encourage you where to go for more information so that you can access that either online or in hard copy. And I'll describe some of those. And I'd like to introduce some of the other folks working with me today who will be presenting. First off, we have our lead on pipeline safety within Pennsylvania from our League of Women Voters Board, Dr. Roberta Winters. Roberta has been a strong advocate for a balanced approach for energy development within Pennsylvania. She has written many policy papers for Pennsylvania. She's very active at the state level of working with the Citizens Advisory Commission, with DEP and so on. We have both met with some of the governor's staff and so on, so we are very interested in providing educational material in a nonpartisan manner here today. And we have with us, I'm happy to have the Executive Director of the Pipeline Safety Coalition, Ms. Linda Farrell. Linda Farrell is not only the Executive Director of the Pipeline Safety Coalition, but she will explain some of her history, I'm sure, and her firsthand knowledge of pipelines, having multiple pipelines cross her farm in Chester County. And that's how she got engaged, was as an individual property owner some years ago. She has become quite an expert, and we are thrilled that she's made time to join us on the program today. So with that, I would like to thank our hosts, the Columbia-Montour Source Water Protection Committee, and apologize to you all because it's probably going to sound like I'm moving very quickly here to cover a lot of material. What we do ask is, because we have that second meeting coming up, I would just ask us to try to hold questions to the end. So we'll try to have that opportunity to do that. So we have kind of gone through, this is our contact information, and our organizers here, Heather and so on at the district, will have a copy of, if anyone would like the presentation, I'd be happy to provide it to you, or we can make it available for you. And it's also being videotaped, so that will be accessible too for people who couldn't be here today. So let me just talk about what we're going to try to get done in this very short time focused of what we have. I'm going to go over some of the kind of set the table, what I call in this introduction, and then Linda will come up and give you an overview on pipeline planning and so forth in terms of siting, who does what, where are the responsibilities between the federal government, the state, and local, and what's the role of each of these groups. And I apologize for all these acronyms. You're going to bump into lots and lots of acronyms, and Linda will explain what some of those are. Then Roberta will come up and talk about some of the, since we are working with the steering committee here for the Source Water Coalition, we're going to talk a lot about the environmental impacts of the pipelines and then wrap up. So that's what we're planning to do today. And what I want to encourage you to do is, if you feel this is helpful to have this kind of a forum, like I said, this is a kind of an appetizer course about pipelines. What we actually do with the League is we have a federal grant from the Department of Transportation who regulates pipelines in the country. It's the
PHMSA.
Thank you. It's PHMSA, yes. The Pipeline and Hazardous Safety Materials Administration, thanks. I knew I was going to blow that one. Better known as PHMSA, which is, since pipelines are considered a method of transport, it may sound weird, but it's under the Department of Transportation. So that's how that works. And so we have a couple of grants going to educate the public about pipelines. And what we would encourage you to do, if you feel this is a topic you want to really dig into and learn more about, we're giving you a very short appetizer course today. We have been doing forums around the state of Pennsylvania, and we just did one last week in Lehigh County. We've done them in Northampton County. We've been up in, where else have we been? Susquehanna, we've been in Bucks County. I mean, we've been wherever the residents feel that would be helpful, and we can bring to the table a number of experts for you to help get your questions answered, get you access to the right information, whether it's the 811, the emergency response issues, how does that get done, the pipeline companies themselves. We always ask the pipeline operators to participate in that. But you're just kind of probably at the beginning. So it's going to seem a little bit overwhelming, and we're going to do the best we can to get you started today with a little bit of the key issues. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on what the League does, but I did just want to mention we have two things tying together today. One is our Water Resource Education Network, which I'm the statewide director for. And what we do is we provide grants and support for small community organizations like the Columbia-Montour Source Water Coalition to educate themselves about their water resources. And we do projects all over the state of Pennsylvania. We've awarded, now that's up to 350 community coalitions and about $2.2 million. And these are grassroots public education projects just like you're sitting in today, where we offer opportunities for citizens to understand, learn more, and get engaged. We also have publications available at the League website. We've been working for, 5-6 years now on shale gas. Some very fine work is available at the www.lwvpa.org. That's our state league website on shale gas. There is a page out there for pipelines, and Roberta will talk more about that, but a lot of the educational material on pipelines is available on that webpage. We also, as I just mentioned, have this pipeline safety project, which this is part of today, where we are available to come out and create presentations to the needs of the community, to run a forum for you where people can have an opportunity to sit, have their questions answered, and go a little bit more in depth than what we're going to be able to do today. So with that, I just want to clarify a quick point. What is WREN? We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that's dedicated to educating and empowering Pennsylvania citizens to learn more about their water resources so that they know how to take action. We don't tell people how to take action. We try to tell you what the tools are available, where the funding sources are. We put out a free monthly newsletter at our website, and we work very closely with EPA, with DEP, Pennsylvania Rural Water Association, with the Boroughs Association, with Penn State Cooperative Extension, Susquehanna River Basin Commission. We work a lot with them. So we are a statewide project. So I work with hundreds and hundreds of residents and communities across Pennsylvania. And that's our goal, to help citizens learn how to take action. So we form these coalitions. And we share the products that they develop at our website so people don't have to reinvent the wheel. So what we're going to be talking about today, and we'll go more in depth, but there are some changes coming, obviously. There's many changes where this is becoming a common sight in many rural areas of Pennsylvania. And what I want to say about this is that transmission lines in general are relatively safe. However, failures can be catastrophic. So if anyone's been following the news, there have been a number of issues of pipeline explosions, leaks, etc. in different places around the country. We have aging infrastructure in many cases around the United States, and that's starting to become very visible. 100% of the natural gas in the country moves through pipelines. So that's the only way it's going to get from one place to another. About 66% of the oil is moved through pipelines. And while maybe none of us may want to welcome a pipeline in the community, it's important to remember that we ourselves are increasing our demand for energy. So the demand for energy in the United States has gone up 36% in the last decade. So this is why we're seeing a lot more capacity that needs to be developed. Many of the pipelines that have been in place in Pennsylvania were at maximum capacity. So, and we now have this local gas source within the state. So that's why the only way to have those wells get to the markets, both down south, to the north, New England, and so on, is to convey it through these pipelines. The one that I understand is being proposed by the Williams organization for the area is a fairly large one. It's a combination of a 36-inch and a 42-inch pipeline that's coming. As you can see here, these are fairly large. They're very, very large capacity and high pressure pipelines. So like I said, we're going to do our best to get through a little bit. This is the forum that we just did last week up at Cedar Crest College. If you'd like to have a more in-depth, these run about 3 hours long. They're free, and we will put whatever resources, the speakers we can get to talk with you. You'll be hearing a lot more from Williams themselves. I'm sure they have many meetings planned with every community coming up over the next month or so. I looked to see what counties have available, and I just saw that this is brand new, this pipeline consultation worksheet, they call it, fact sheet on creating consultation zones. So this is available with a lot of the frequently asked questions. So there are more and more materials that are starting to become available. Now, what you may not realize is that, you know, there are hundreds of thousands of miles already. We said 164,000 miles, hazardous liquid lines, and almost about, that's probably out of date, 300,000 miles of natural gas lines every day moving energy around the country. What do we have in Pennsylvania? We have right now, again, this is probably a little bit out of date, but this is right off the PHMSA website. In Pennsylvania, we have 2,900 miles of hazardous liquid line mileage, and about 10,000 miles of gas lines. Gathering lines, that's got to be way out of date. We don't know where they are because gathering lines are, Pennsylvania is one of the few states that does not regulate gathering lines in rural areas, in Class 1 areas. And Linda will talk a little bit more about that. So we don't really know there. So we have quite a bit. So if you add it all up, about 61,000 miles of pipeline mileage. A lot more is coming. This is a study that was done by the Nature Conservancy, and based on their assessment, we will probably likely see another 10,000 to 25,000 miles of new pipelines in Pennsylvania by 2030. They estimate, now these are folks that are experts on forests and looking at impacts to the forest. They estimate that will result in direct forest clearing of 60,000 to 150,000 acres of Pennsylvania forest. And as we fragment the forest, they use a term called edge effect, where this edge now could actually start to introduce opportunities for invasive species or change the habitat in the local area. so that animals that need that safety of the forest, contiguous forest to cross and so on, will not be able to do that. So there's a tremendous concern now about the fragmentation of Pennsylvania's forest areas. And why is that important to water? Well, because the forest area itself, for many rural water systems, serves as the passive water treatment plant for your water before it gets to your plant. That forest is saving us tons and tons of money because we don't have to treat water to the high degree or build these more sophisticated treatment plants to clean the water from pollutants. So the forest gives us many, many benefits from a water treatment standpoint. And there have been studies that have shown the direct correlation that that there's a 2-to-1 correlation between the amount of forest cover and lowering the chemical cost to treat the water. So these were studies done by the American Water Works Association. So there's a direct correlation of the benefit of that forest to treatment of the water supply, so it keeps our costs down. So I'm just going to set the table for Linda here and just kind of talk about what was in the paper, the press enterprise, that says what's happening here. And so the paper said that there were land surveyors that planned to visit about 300 properties in 9 Columbia County townships over the coming months as they map out this proposed route. And they said that it would bisect the county north to south from Sugarloaf Township north of Benton to Cleveland Township south of Catawissa. The company that has the proposed pipeline is a company called Williams Partners, Tulsa, Oklahoma-based energy firm. In addition to the pipeline mileage, they will, the proposal includes a 25,000 horsepower compressor station to be located. The preliminary maps, I saw that maybe Hemlock Township, so I don't know exactly where that is along the line, but that's what I found in some of their materials that are online. They will be seeking, since this is an interstate, it will be going between multiple states, so it will be a federally regulated line by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. It's 176 miles through 6 Pennsylvania counties. So this is going all the way from Susquehanna County all down through Lancaster and then out. So they need a lot of easements. What they're looking for a permanent easement is a 55-foot wide land easement from property owners. And because they will file under FERC, they can have power of eminent domain in the courts. And Linda will talk more about that. They will look for what's called a certificate of public convenience and necessity for the project, which is vested in FERC. And they look to have, I saw projected as the $2.6 billion pipeline. Their time frame is to have that flowing with gas by the second half of 2017. So they're going to look to be moving very, very quickly here. And they'll be having dozens of public meetings coming up with everyone along that route. So that's what's happening now. I mentioned the compressor station. There is, when you see this term greenfield compression station, that means it's going on what you consider like native land. It's not an industrial site. It's not a blacktop site. This is possibly whatever's there, whether it's a farm, whether it's forested. That's what a greenfield site is. It's an undeveloped, what we think of undeveloped land. That's what a greenfield is. And so they propose to put the compressor station on that greenfield site. When they put compressor stations in, the company acquires the land. That is a fee simple transaction as opposed to an easement where they run the pipeline through. So they actually buy this property to put the compressor station. And there is an existing compressor station. Some of you may know it's up in the northern part of Columbia County. That's station number 517. That one is slated to be upgraded with additional horsepower. The one that's 610, which is the second one that's going on the greenfield, is going to be about 25,000 horsepower compression station. So that's what's expected. Now I mentioned the significance here with these changes, you know, how many more miles of pipeline are coming. We are at the very front end of the development of shale. We're probably at about maybe 10, maybe we're at about 10%. So these changes that we're seeing right now are just the beginning of the shale development that's projected to happen within Pennsylvania. This is right from the Williams website, and I apologize, this is going to be difficult to see, but these are on the website. This pipeline is known as the Atlantic Sunrise Pipeline, and if you want to locate it, just Google Atlantic Sunrise Pipeline, and you will come up with the Williams webpage, and they will show you the images for each county and where that route right now is a proposed route. Just again, getting back to our Foundation for Source Water, we have a website here that talks about source water protection. It explains how this works through DEP, how the how we do the delineation of the maps for water supply. And I'm just going to walk you through that very quickly. You have some folks that are experts now here locally from the coalition, and they've been working very closely to look at where their water supply areas are. And the grant helped them develop the brochure, and what we have in here is actually the map of where your public water supplies are within Columbia-Montour, and we call it the red dot, blue dot. If they have a blue dot, that means they have an approved source water protection plan approved by Pennsylvania DEP. If they're a red dot, we would love them to come into this program and work on doing the mapping and so on for that water supply, so people know where is the recharge area that recharges this public water. So we know that is a sensitive area that should be treated appropriately. So that's right there for you. So this is the map. When we do the source water protection mapping, and I want to thank Mark Stevens from DEP here for this map. This is what it looks like, where these are all your recharge areas for your water supplies in the county. So this is based on a rigorous protocol that's been developed by EPA and DEP. It's done by professional hydrogeologists, and the plan itself is about this thick. It takes into account the soils, the geology, the pumping rates of the wells. There is so much different data layers that go into this computer model, but this is the way that we delineate a public water supply, so that we now can have some very important information to talk to people like FERC, people like your commissioners, people like your state elected representatives, people like your local elected officials, people like DEP, when these pipeline companies need to get permits that cross through some of these water bodies. You will know which water bodies now, at least for these water systems that have done these maps, they know which ones are very sensitive because it's part of the public water supply. Why is that important? Because, and this is just a quick listing of who the water systems are, just quick kind of statistics. You have about 67,000 people now living in Columbia County. I found about 67% of the population is served by public water. So these are the systems, and the sizes. United Water is the largest, Pennsylvania American, Berwick, Catawissa. I think Cindy's here, Cindy Bachman. Where's Cindy? Cindy. Cindy's back from Catawissa is here. So Benton, so on. So quite a few people are dependent on those water supplies. So this is a two-phase approach, source water assessment, source water protection. I'm not going to get into all this. I mentioned it's a voluntary program to get a protection plan in place. What's wonderful is that this is free to the water system and free to the community. So there is no out-of-pocket expense for them to get some wonderful information that's going to map, delineate where their drinking water comes from. It lists all of the potential sources of contamination, everything that's in a permit. You know, it could be a wastewater plant, it could be industrial, it could be a cemetery, auto refinisher, a plater, failing septic systems, roadways, pipelines, ag runoff. All of that is inventoried, and it's prioritized from A to F. What are the highest priority risks that present the highest risk to this water supply? So that residents know how they can better make decisions about protecting that water supply. And then there's a management plan to help you understand how could we protect that water supply. So a lot of great information in there. that would serve you for the next 20 years. So, you know, when you think about your children, your children's children, you want to know that your town's water supply is going to be reliable and safe and protected for the future. This is a great way to do it. If you had to go out on the market and buy this from an engineering company to put this together, you're going to spend anywhere from probably $30,000 to $60,000 to get the equivalent of this information. So that's why we're so anxious to have all water systems take advantage of this. And Mark Stevens here from DEP has done a wonderful job of working with water systems. He's terrific. One of the most knowledgeable DEP people because he comes from the environmental cleanup field. He knows what happens when things go wrong or badly. So he's got a lot of real world expertise. So just to wrap up quickly, we map the supply areas, we identify the risks, and we come up with what the measures are, and that makes up the plan. As I said, it's funded under the Safe Drinking Water Act through DEP. And we just encourage you to get involved now, that all systems in your counties have this available. This is a very important tool as you're going into this period of change within Columbia-Montour County. It would be great to know that something as fundamental as public drinking water has a plan in place to protect it. So this is available. How do these maps look? Just so you can see, these are real examples from Pennsylvania. If this is the well, this is a municipal well. Every one of these arrows is a 1-year time of travel. How long will it take a contaminant to get from this point to the well? And what DEP does is they map out a 10-year time of travel, and that's called Zone 2. So there's several zones. I'm not going to get it. This is a workshop in and of itself. But just know that this kind of mapping, as you can see, this aquifer does not follow a nice, neat circle. These folks out here are actually have more to do with what could pollute this well than these people right nearby. And that's because of the way the groundwater flows under the surface. So we can actually put this together, and now we know the areas that could be impacted. Here's another one along the Susquehanna River, a well, and you can see that kind of an area. So any transportation corridors, pipelines, anything that could present a risk to this water supply, we now know where that could be and how long it would take till it could reach that municipal well. So that's very important data. Some of your water systems pull off the Susquehanna. They're what we call surface water. They actually pull off streams or the rivers or the tributaries. Same thing. We have 3 zones and they can pull in this water. Same thing with a time of travel of 3 zones, but only it's 5 hours or 25 hours and so on. So that idea, how long does it take till this pollutant reaches our intake for the municipal water supply? How are people using this information? Well, in Tioga County, what they're doing, this is the Tioga 911 system. We've taken these maps, and they were so excited about this that their director of GIS pulled these maps into the dispatch screens so that if there was a truck accident off of in a rural road, they would know within 300 feet that that's in an area of a municipal water supply. And they now know that they can call the water system. They may need to shut off an intake. They need to take action to protect that water supply. We would like to have all 911 centers in Pennsylvania have this kind of information to protect water supplies. Time is very, very much of the essence when you're trying to deal with contamination. So I'm going to jump right now and turn this over at this point to Linda, and she's going to talk a little bit more about this particular project. So Linda, turn it over to you. Oh, okay.
Thanks, Julie. Well, we're getting the next presentation up. I'll give you a little background. My name is Linda Farrell. I'm Executive Director of Pipeline Safety Coalition.
Do you want me to leave those maps? Williams, or do you want me to go right into yours?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We're based in Chester County. Ironically, I became interested in gas pipeline safety as a result of moving to a property to farm it and discovering the day after we moved in that there was an anomaly or a potential rupture of a Williams Transco gas pipeline in the field that I was planning to farm. I have since had a relationship, truly a relationship, with Williams Transco since 1992. At one point, the pipes in the field were experiencing so much corrosion that the excavation needed to repair the pipes essentially put me out of business. I couldn't farm the land anymore. It was being dug up too often to be able to produce crops. My background is also in, thank you, is also in education. I went to Susquehanna University and am a special ed educator. So I took some of my background in education and some experience in the gas pipelines, and ultimately formed Pipeline Safety Coalition in 2011. We're a Pennsylvania nonprofit, and we were organized as a result of my experience with Williams, but also a number of other folks in Chester County who were involved in a pipeline replacement project by Williams Transco in 2008. And I can tell you that if I had my iPhone in front of me, I could show you all that they're still working on that replacement. 2008 and 2014, they are now replacing a segment of the pipeline that we deemed absolutely needed to be replaced, but it was crossing a high-quality water, two tributaries to drinking water resource for the Chester County and Delaware County areas. And we felt that, and DEP agreed with us, that the pipeline should be replaced by a horizontal drill under this watershed. It was 2,000 feet. And I think at one point someone opined that if you can go into the Mississippi River by a horizontal drill, you sure could go 2,000 feet distance in order to protect the watershed. Williams kind of dug their heels into the ground and said, no, we don't want to horizontal drill. We think that the better way to cross these three crossings, three water crossings in 2,167 feet. The better way to do this is by open cut. What the definition of better is still debatable, but they in fact did essentially put off the replacement of that pipeline from 2008 to 2014 in order to get their preferred method, which is an open cut, and they are currently open cutting on 33% slopes, those three crossings of the watershed of those creeks. So that's kind of maybe a little more than you need to know, but I think it's really in all transparency. Again, I have had a personal relationship with Williams Transco since 1992. And the folks that were involved in this initial crossing of the Brandywine Creek, a federal judge called us the Brandywine Five. Brandywine Creek, there were 5 landowners. They took us to eminent domain. We won the case. We won the case, which is almost unheard of. But we won the case because at the time, Williams did not have the DEP crossing permits that were required for them to open cut the Brandywine. And the federal judge said, you know what, that's it. They don't have the permits, they can't do the job. So the landowners involved in that eminent domain proceeding always talked about forming a coalition so that other landowners wouldn't have to go through what we went through in being disenfranchised, trying to learn about what our rights were and what the whole pipeline process was about. So that's what Pipeline Safety Coalition is about now. And I was asked to talk to you today about some of the things that you need to know, and as the League of Women Voters does, Pipeline Safety Coalition travels all through actually Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and we talk to landowners, government officials, we talk to operators about what you need to know. What do you need to know, and why do you need to know it about pipelines? Up until recently, pipelines are under the ground, out of sight, out of mind. But actually, there's more than just pipeline involved in pipeline infrastructure. So we'll talk about pipeline infrastructure, siting factors, and who regulates what. This is a photograph, by the way, in Williamsport. This website will be on whatever you folks make available to people. Terry Wildstock, some phenomenal photography of what's been going on up in this region with pipeline infrastructure. So it's good to know, to start with, what we're looking at. Mapping is old. All the mapping is old. And the hazardous liquids and gas transmission pipeline system over here for the country is not available overlaid with just one part of the infrastructure. These are compressor stations, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. But if you overlaid the compressor stations with some of the other infrastructure, it would be a daunting picture. Julie referenced the Nature Conservancy projections that about an additional 25,000 new miles of pipeline are needed for transporting natural gas. And that's just natural gas. We're not talking about hazardous liquids. That's more infrastructure. And some of the infrastructure components are listed in this table, and I'll go through those with a little more specificity. Just from a structural standpoint, again, just natural gas, not hazardous liquids. You've got your natural gas wellhead, gathering lines, and I'm really bad at using these things. I usually just kind of go gathering lines and processing plants, compressor stations, transmission lines, and I'll go through those a little more in detail. So the infrastructure and who regulates what. The well pads can be anywhere from 3 acres plus, and you may or may not have been given the information that a well pad does not necessarily have just one drill on that well pad. So a well pad can now hold up to 6, and actually the capacity is for more than 6 wells per pad. Again, takes about 3 acres. Any regulation on well pads, obviously siting is based on where the fuel is, and the regulations that do exist are with DEP and EPA. Roads and impoundments, water impoundments, account for about 5.7 acres. Again, cited by the industry and by the resource. And so you have an average of about 10 acres per well pad. And that excludes the infrastructure beyond there. Gathering lines are a big issue here in Pennsylvania because, as Julie mentioned, Class 1 gathering lines, which are the gathering lines that are in the most rural areas of the state, and by nature, much of Marcellus Shale is in our more rural areas. Class 1 gathering lines are not regulated for siting or for safety. Siting and safety are both under the purview of the operator, and there is no obligation to provide siting or safety information to PUC, to state, local, or otherwise. Act 127 in 2011 did give PUC the ability to inspect and provide oversight of intrastate, and we'll talk about that, non-utility pipelines. And this is almost a direct quote because the language is very specific for a very specific reason. So the PUC has the authority to inspect and provide oversight of interstate gathering lines from Class 2 to Class 4. And when you're talking about classing a pipeline, it's essentially Class 1 is an area where the least amount of damage, both physically and physically. So fewer people will die, less physical damage will be done in Class 1. Class 2 up to Class 4. Class 4, that's where the biggest catastrophic damage will be done if there is an explosion, an accident, whatever. Now, one of the reasons that is troubling to us here in Pennsylvania is that the diameter of a lot of these gathering lines are now the diameter of transmission lines. So where you used to see gathering lines coming from a well site of maybe 6, 8, 10 inches, many of them are now 24 inches, 20 inches, and being that they're unregulated is a bit of a concern for safety, and the fact that many of these well pads have more than one drill site, one well on the pad, means that you've got multiple gathering lines on that well pad. If you have 6 wells on a well pad, you have 6 gathering lines as well, so you multiply your potential safety risk. So from the gathering line, you go to a processing plant. This particular, I'm going to use my little pointer, Julie. This particular processing plant is in Washington County, 26 of 106 acres that were in Clean and Green in 2010. And this is something we don't talk about a lot, but what the impact is to the tax base for your community as well. Taxes increased from $103 to $8,000 per year in Washington County in this site. Siting again is done by the industry based on the well location, where the resources are, and where the fuel is going to market. Regulations again predominantly are DEP and EPA regulations. So this is a this is kind of interesting because this project, this Commonwealth Midstream project, is believed to be a precursor to what we're now talking about, the Atlantic Sunrise Project. This project was called a midstream, Commonwealth Midstream, and it was coming from up in your neck of the woods here, only over here as opposed to over here, and coming down here as opposed to where it will now be coming down through, if I'm pointing right to Lancaster County. Yeah, here. But will not be heading into Chester County, and this is kind of a mid plan. And the point is that when you have public participation, government participation, you've got participation from with the operators and with FERC, if FERC is applicable. Pipeline routes do change. Brings to mind as well in another Williams Transco project that was coming from up in this area down in this neck of the woods called the Bluegrass. That was just scrapped by Williams. Part of the reason it was scrapped by Williams is because the community, the local community and officials were able to point to problems with this pipeline that ultimately would have been FERC problems in a siting process, and were able to dissuade the project, so to speak. So a midstream is more of that murky area. Gathering lines are murky. Midstreams and bidirectionals the terms are used interchangeably. I was at a conference last week it was an industry conference, and one of the executives was asked, what's the difference between a midstream and a bidirectional? And he said, you're going to have to ask somebody else. We're still kind of new at this, and we're still kind of getting the lingo down and trying to hone down what our definitions are. But the point is that a midstream does not have the same regulations that an interstate or an intrastate has, because it's kind of murky what it really is. Bidirectional, same thing. But the one thing they do share is that they move the fuel in both directions. So when the market dictates export, the bidirectional midstreams can export. When the market indicates we need to be importing, it's just a switch out of infrastructure. Which leads us to infrastructure. Transmission lines are 20 to 60 inch. 40 to 60 is almost standard now. One of the reasons for that is that our existing infrastructure was put in the ground at about 30 to 42 inch with a maximum operating pressure, that's MAOP, another acronym you're going to hear a lot, with a maximum operating pressure of about 1,000 PSI. Now, Marcellus Shale can be moved at a PSI up to 1,300. So the pipelines that are going in the ground now are going to be larger. They can accommodate a larger flow and move more fuel more quickly. They are coated, so that green that you're seeing is a coating. This is a weld. And I'm gonna guess that this is probably only about maybe a 30 max. 20 maybe, yeah. But they are coated with a corrosion inhibitor. There is typically a line that runs along the transmission line. It's called cathodic protection, and it helps to keep things like rocks from being attracted and making big holes in it. That's a very lay perspective, but that's about right. And they're buried an average of 30 inches, but they can be 3 to 6 feet, depending on the locale. So we talked also about the difference between, there are different kinds of transmission lines. There's an interstate that crosses boundaries of states or countries, and then there are intrastate, and they remain within state boundaries. What's important to know about that is that the siting is different and the regulation is different. And not only is it different for the inter and intrastate, but it's also different for gas and hazardous liquids. It's a very confusing system, and that's one of the reasons that the League is so good and Pipeline Safety Coalition is so adamant about reaching out to the communities so that you know what you're talking about when someone knocks on your door and says there's a pipeline coming through your property. Well, is it gas? Is it hazardous liquid? Is it intrastate? Is it interstate? Is it midstream? Is it a distribution line? Because all of that makes a difference in how you react to the proposed pipeline and how you negotiate your agreement or don't go with an agreement. So an intrastate, again, is cited by the industry. There's no FERC application. So essentially the industry can put that pipe wherever they need to put the pipe. PUC enforces pipeline safety standards and regulations under that U.S. Department of Transportation, PHMSA, Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. And interstate, and those are the lines that cross from Pennsylvania to New Jersey, et cetera. Those pipelines are regulated for siting by FERC, and I'll talk in a minute about the process with FERC. Hazardous liquids, even if they're interstate, do not go through FERC regulations for siting. And I'll share with you something that, because there's a lot of controversy these days with PUC being asked to give Sunoco Logistics public utility status on a hazardous liquids materials pipeline project. And the reason they want the public utility status is that with public utility status comes the power of eminent domain, and also skirts the need to abide by the municipal planning codes of a municipality. And so what Pipeline Safety Coalition has said is, well, gee, that's a little bit in conflict with Act 13, with the Supreme Court finding that overturned the section of Act 13 that eviscerated municipal zoning authority in all things gas and oil pipeline. Okay. So that's, I guess, an issue we'll put on the table for now. The FERC does have the authority to regulate tariffs for hazardous liquids, and because they are able to regulate tariffs for hazardous liquids and not siting, but because they can regulate tariffs, they are considered to be regulated by FERC. Therefore, since they are regulated by FERC, they do have the ability to ask for public utility status. It's a pretty important distinction there. And then you've got the compressor stations and pump stations. Compressors are natural gas, pump is hazardous liquids, typically every 40 to 100 miles. So if you're thinking about pipelines being underground, remember that you've got those processing plants that we talked about. You've got compressor stations, and this down here is a pump station in southeast Pennsylvania. And those are some of the impacts, the water pollution being one. And then you've got valves, and the valves are cited by wherever the industry needs to have them for safety regulations. And you've got smart pigs, smart pig launchers and smart pigs. Smart pigs are put into a pipe to run through and determine whether or not there are any corrosive problems, and it's all safety regulated. Then you've got the city gate. The city gate is where the fuel is, the PSI of the fuel is reduced to the PSI down to maybe 3 to be used by the consumers in a city. And that's where the odor mercaptan is added. And then you've got the infrastructure going from the city gate to your house or the hospital or the daycare, whatever. And the siting is done by the utility, and the safety is by PUC. And then, as we've heard before, up in the drilling areas, you've got freshwater pipes and flowback water pipes. And they're not regulated for siting or safety at all. So this will be available to you folks, but essentially siting begins with the operators, their general route evaluation and project feasibility analysis. That's before they come knocking at your door. That's before they talk to your planning commission. We would suggest that that a conversation with the planning commission at the very least would be a good idea when an operator is considering a pipeline project in a community. Siting and safety, very confusing. Again, these are some links that you can refer to when you access this presentation. This is basically the cliff notes of how the process works. What I would really want to impart to you is that if it is a FERC process, if it's an interstate and there's a FERC filing, every citizen, every community, every planning commission, county commissioners, legislators should file as an intervener. Filing it as an intervener in a FERC process, simply, it's free. It gives you the right to comment on any of the proceedings, and it gives you the right to be notified of any public filings that are made on a project, so that you have the information you need to know about what's going on in this project, what are the obstacles, what is the process, what stage is the process at. But more important than anything else, this is a quote from Carolyn Elephant, who is an attorney that I met back in 2008 in our battles with Williams Transco. She represented us in that eminent domain case that I told you about. And she states on her website that in 2009, FERC processed 100% of protested projects within 300 days. 97 or 95% within 365 days. This is probably too short a time frame. There's a link to this website down at the bottom of this page. Strongly recommend all communities look at that Protecting Your Rights website. Look at that publication. It's free to anyone who needs it. Pipeline Safety
It's available at the
Coalition.
League Pipeline site.
It's on the
Right, this booklet
Good.
is there.
And we're always happy to help too. Thanks.
Do you want to go to the commission?
How are we doing things for time? Roberta's got about 5 minutes, so we can continue? Okay.
Sure, let's, yeah.
Okay.
Can you pull that up for me? What I wanted to share with you before everybody has to go to the next meeting, there's a paper handout here, and it gives you pipeline planning resources, including here are the sites that Linda has mentioned. And on the back, there's a handy-dandy table that's called Siting Regulations and Safety Regulations for Pipelines. It lists all the agencies that are responsible, what the league found based on our studies, what's available presently, and what's needed and what's lacking. So this may be something that's useful to you, and I hope you all get one. Now, I'm going to push this because I know it's fast. They say pictures are worth 1,000 words. These are the pipelines in Pennsylvania, and they're done by operator. And those orange blobs are storage facilities. We have 25 storage facilities, 60 storage facilities in 25 counties in the Commonwealth right now. You've seen these pipelines running north to south, which will bring the Marcellus gas into the market. My job is to go through environmental impacts very quickly. Erosion and sedimentation is a big problem. You really need to talk to DEP. You know, they're responsible for giving those permits for everything. And they're on the fast track to permitting, 30 days. So it's important that you talk to your legislators, you talk to people at DEP and say, these are important areas. We can't afford to have you look at these in 30 days and rubber stamp a permit. They're clearing corridors and right-of-ways. These steep slopes are real. They're going to cause long-term stormwater problems in your communities. The hydrogeology changes. During construction, there are areas where they do staging. There are areas where they put the pipelines, they trench, they then backfill. The way they backfill determines the hydrogeology. In some areas, you may want areas that are filled with things that are impregnable. You don't want necessarily the acid mine that's up the top of the hill, that water to flow into the water that's near this pipeline, which is going to go into your source water. There's very important decisions that have to be made. DEP cannot just look and stamp it. You need to let them know what's in your neighborhood, what they have to watch out for. Again, they're laying the pipeline, they refill, then they restore. There's a permanent area, there's a temporary area. It's never going to look the same again. The water is not going to flow the same. These are slides from the Delaware River Basin. This is the Delaware River Keeper Network. They've monitored what was happening in 2012. This is what it looked like before, this is what it looked like afterwards. We're talking about very valuable watersheds. The compacting and fragmentation that Julie talked about, when they put in a pipeline, they put heavy equipment down those paths. It's like concrete when they're done. When they restore it, that revegetation doesn't look anything like a real tree. What they put there is not what was left. I mean, it just doesn't work the same. The fragmentation, this isn't Tioga State Forest. This is not far. You know, this is Pennsylvania today. This is not Wyoming. Again, this is from the U.S. Department down here. U.S. government says pipelines are twice as fragmenting as drilling. You're looking at greater interior losses. You're looking at edge effects, as Julie mentioned. We're getting invasive species in, those species that depend on the interior forest. You need to know what's in your land. You need to know where those endangered species are. You need to be able to assess what's there. I bet you have high quality and exceptional value streams nobody's recognized. I bet you have bog turtles here. I bet you have bats here. But if nobody knows they're here, they can't be protected. And with their protection comes your protection of the water supply. Again, this is an high quality stream. They're crossing it. Again,
Wet crossing.
wet crossing.
Yeah, that's a wet crossing.
This is from the Delaware River Keeper. They had monitors out there. Just because you get this happening doesn't mean you stop. You've got to monitor all the way through the process. This is an example of one small project, 25 miles. 250 acres of land was impacted, crossing 1,729 feet of 90 water bodies, 17,777 feet of 136 wetlands, and required at least 29 access roads. You're getting a bigger line through Columbia County than this. Pennsylvania is blessed with water, but with that blessing comes challenges. Again, when you're looking at pipelines, there are ways to cross rivers and streams and wetlands. There are better ways than other ways. You need to know. You need to put the pressure on. You need to get the conditions you need that you're going to feel safe drinking that water, and your grandkids are going to feel safe drinking that water. Again, sometimes the dry ditch method doesn't work. You know, the streams overflow. All these decisions are based on, for example, the size of the pipeline, the pressures it's operating under. It's based on the width of the waterways. It's based on the flow of the water. And you know, those 100-year storms are coming every other week. Again, this horizontal deep drilling, you've seen it. It works.
Can you explain what that is, Roberta?
What they do is go under the creek, the waterbed. So if you're crossing the Mississippi River, this is what you do. they have all this technology these days. They go underneath, they start with a little hole, they keep making it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they can put a big pipeline through. And they have it all mapped out, and when they've got the hole, then they pull the pipeline through. It's sort of like, ladies here, you know how you used to make the elastic skirts, you pull elastic through with the, yeah, that's what they do. And that's how they pull it through. They just coat it and pull it right through. Now, don't think it's not without a problem though. Sometimes, we have these limestone geologies, we have sort of silty stuff under the river, and they have this bentonite, which is an inert clay. It's no big deal, it's dead, who's gonna care? But sometimes they have these called frackouts where it blows up into the stream and all over the trees and everything around it. And that's probably not too good for the fish and the eggs. And it's probably not too good to go into the water intakes of your public water supplies. So this is a challenge, so you need to be aware that even what a lot of people think is the best method is not foolproof. And a lot of these companies don't have the same kind of experience you do because they're not locals. They don't know where the problems are. They might be from Oklahoma or Texas, Colorado. So, you need to have your eyes on what's under your feet. When they cross those wetlands, they're supposed to use these nice wooden bridges so that the big equipment can flow over nicely. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the perimeter controls don't hold up. I don't know what happened around here last week, but I know what my house was like. Again, this is a map of just crossing the Delaware River basin, all the different pipelines, what's existing, what doesn't exist. And you notice how some of them are they look like they're like a, beaded necklace with different colors. That's because they segment the pipelines. And when they segment them, they don't have to go through the same conditions. They don't go through the same environmental permitting processes because they're smaller. It's just like what you do for 5 acres, you don't have to do for 2 acres. So it has to do with the length of these pipelines and how they segment them, and it's very tricky. So they've been at it a long time. We're new to the game. So you need to play the game, and you got to know the rules. Again, hydrogeology is a problem, the wetlands and sensitive streams are problems, and the erosion and sedimentation are going to be problems. This is right there where they're putting a gathering line up in the Wellsboro area. This is actually on the Susquehanna River after one of those nice floods. So that's a safety issue, in case you couldn't figure that out. You've got to watch those compressor stations. Compressor stations are large industrial operations. They go 24/7. It's like having jet engines next to your house. They make a lot of noise. You can mitigate that. You've got to make sure that you get the conditions that you want. They are noisy, and they have a tendency to also emit a lot of volatile organics other than methane. So there's other things coming up into the air, and we know from things like acid rain, what comes up comes down, right? Might not always like it. This is an example. They're like jet engines. You see those big tanks? And, boom, lots of noise. Go to Lycoming County, go to a nearby place, check them out, see what they look like. And again, because of Pennsylvania being ruled, we don't have all the air monitoring facilities around these stations. We don't know what's in the air. We know from other places it's not good. Again, every place you saw, those processes have a lot of tanks. Remember that spill down in West Virginia? They didn't tell you, but some of those same chemicals are what they use in fracking. But we don't know that in Pennsylvania. But they do leak on occasion, and with the leaking comes some problems. This is one of the tanks in West Virginia, not necessarily the one that leaked, but you can see that's not the best moat system. But a lot of the, when the compressor stations come through and they regulate the presses, there's some condensation. They have a lot of tanks around those compressor stations and processing facilities. You want to make sure they have the kind of containment. So when they do leak, or if they do leak, you're protected and your water supply is as well. Again, leaks exist. This is a system that shows the magnitude of leaks in San Francisco. You're not San Francisco. These are distribution lines. But your emergency prepared people need to know. The public needs to know. You've got problems right here in Pennsylvania. This is accidents. Allentown, I don't have to tell you any more about that. The methane leaks, we're losing 10%, 1 to 10% in storage and transmission of our pipelines. Some of it's by accident, some of it's by design. Those valves they turn on and off, up in the air. 20 times more effective at trapping gas of heat than CO2. We're looking at significant climate change issues. And let's see if the next one comes up. And the EPA is having a global methane initiative right now to try to stop some of that stuff, but we need to do our part here as well. And I'd just like to tell you that you can get everything you need on our LEAD website. And this is not going to move. Ah, there you go. So we are a force for citizens and a voice for change. We hope you will stay in touch, and I want to run you up to the commissioners' meeting. We will. My slideshow is different there. Linda's is different there. So if you want to find out more, go to the commissioners' meeting. Thank you. Is it open? It's not open. Thank you. I have a copy of these books here.
Folks, if you have friends or neighbors who couldn't make it today, there's a similar session put on by the Mountain Watershed Association on Monday, May 12th.